program and that the council had the option of discontinuing it, I started to organize. And my chief of staff, who's also a civil rights lawyer, she and I kind of put together a strategy. And so originally we were only able to get 3 votes against continuation of the contract in February. But we had some people coming to council and raising, bigger picture concerns that this isn't just a simple tool that captures license plate numbers to help us, recover stolen cars, that there are bigger picture concerns. And so after council voted to complete the pilot program, we came back in June for a big decision. And so this is when we had grassroots groups like Electronic Frontier Foundation, folks who are concerned about our immigrant community, folks who are concerned about police overreach, had a number of people testify about the dangers of ALPRs. And that's where my office did a lot of research to look into the exact way that Austin came to a contract with both Flock and Axon, the 2 ALPR providers. And what we learned is that the prior council had gone to extraordinary efforts to create guardrails, protections against misuse of this technology. And that actually the city council had adopted a policy that was probably leading the country in terms of the amount of protections and constraints on how the ALPR technology would be used. But to kind of cut to the chase, it turned out that despite the council policy, the police department and the other city departments hadn't respected those guidelines in the implementation. And so a big one was you were only supposed to be able to use the LPR for certain types of searches. And the police manual was supposed to specifically instruct officers on how to do that. So they were able to look for stolen cars. They were able to look for a certain number of criminal offenses. But other than that, they weren't supposed to use the tool. They weren't supposed to share the data with outside agencies. And there was supposed to be basically a very limited retention period for how long the data would stay available. But it turned out the police department had executed a contract with Flock in particular that basically overrode all of these policies and gave Flock an unlimited license to use the data acquired from surveilling Austinites. I forgot the exact number. I could find it here, but basically millions of scans of license plates, right? And that even the searches, the tens of thousands of searches that the police department had done, over 20,000 were not compliant with the policy. The police officers were putting random information to justify the search. They weren't using one of the specific offenses that they were allowed to search for.
So can you tell me a little bit, I have 2 questions there. The first is when you say offenses they're allowed to search for, what were the policy guardrails with regards to what you're searching for? And more importantly, how does this relate to what was going on in Houston? Because I remember in Houston there were people that were searching for things, they were typing in donut, and sometimes they were just typing in ASDF. So you would just have ASDF, and that's it. And that's something that seems like a serious violation. Donut, it's not even like you're saying, I use this to try and solve a crime, and I didn't actually see that crime, or I'm just going to make up a crime that doesn't exist, or pretend. You're not even pretending at that point. You know it's a joke.
That's right. I remember from the audit that Austin did, 25% of our queries were blank, right?
Right, or gibberish, right? And so there was supposed to be an internal mechanism where the police department was self-auditing, and that internal mechanism fell apart. And so I was trying to finish the story, but long story short, we found out that the city guardrails failed and that we couldn't trust either the vendor or the city departments, frankly, to make sure that Austinites' privacy was protected. In terms of Houston, that didn't come across my plate as like a part of the conversation we were having. Obviously, Houston's had its own issues with police overreach. But I think the national conversation about how Flock was collaborating, for example, with Palantir, being co-owned by this gentleman, Peter Thiel, right? And how at the federal level, they're creating a database on every American. And then at the local level, they're entering into contracts where they acquire data regarding our movements around the community. And that was obviously a big concern.
So what were the type of guardrails that were in that type of policy? My apologies, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. No, there's a lot to get into here. So I've got them in front of me. So the data was only to be used for stolen vehicles and the specific list of offenses, very serious crimes. There was to be no sharing with outside agencies, unless that agency basically completed an MOU agreeing to abide by our guardrails. There was no data sharing with private companies. There's be specific training for the police officers on how to use it. The vendor was only supposed to keep our data for 7 days, and there was going to be an audit at the conclusion of 1 year. And so just to give you one example of a failure, the retention period was a joke, right?